Okay, so welcome everyone to our Core Trust Seal certification session at Dataverse 2021. Thank you all for joining us. It's so early in the morning. We've got a great session here today, and I hope that you'll enjoy everything that we have to share. First, quick couple of things. Our session chairs. I'm Kaylin. There's James and there's Katie, and then we have our note taker Alicia. So please feel free to direct message us if you have any problems during the session. We've got a great set of presenters today. First, we're going to have Laura Vilela Rezende representing Harvard Dataverse, and she will present to us the Dataverse Core Trust Guide and give us a little bit more information about that. And then we have our Core Trust panelists, Philip Konzett from the Arctic University of Norway, representing Dataverse Norway, Sonia Barbosa, representing Harvard Dataverse, and Karine Berger, representing Portage. So we've got a 90-minute session, and we're going to just dive right in. We'll start with a little bit of welcome, which I've done so far. Then Katie will give us information about what is Core Trust, what is the core of the Core Trust seal of approval. Give us a little bit background about that. For those of you who may not be familiar with it, this may be your first exposure to it. Then Laura will provide us information about the Dataverse Guide for Core Trust Seal, walk us through that, give us information about this great resource that was created by the Harvard Dataverse team and the Dataverse team over the last year. Then we'll have our panel on the benefits and experiences of Core Trust certification. That'll take about 30 minutes. Each of our panelists will have 5 minutes to present their slides, give us information about their particular installations and their experiences of Core Trust Seal certification. And then we'll have a breakout room discussion, about 20 minutes, where you'll have an opportunity to get together with other members of the community, talk through some of these issues, and then come back together with some summaries about what you've learned, what you've discovered in your breakout sessions, and then we'll wrap up in 5 minutes. So first, Katie, you're next up on the list. Please give us some information about the Core Trust Seal of Approval.
All right, great. So I'm going to steal the screen share from Kaylin.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna say I can stop it. Do you want me to just stop?
I think I got it.
Okay, yeah, I think you do.
Can you see it? Yeah,
yes,
great.
I can.
We're Zoom pros at this point.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, thanks everybody for joining this morning. I know for some of us it's pretty early, especially if you're on the West Coast in North America or South America. So yeah, I'm Katie Mike. I'm the data services librarian at Harvard Library and IQSS. And I just wanted to give kind of a quick update or overview of the Core Trust Seal before we really dive into our speakers, just to kind of give a little bit of background and context for this session. So the basic idea here of Core Trust Seal is to determine, how do we know if our data is safe? What's the point of a certifying body? We need to know that the data repository is going to be well preserved, that it will keep our data usable far into the future. We as researchers and citizens are increasingly dependent on both digital data and the repositories that provide access to and enable their use. Repositories need to earn that trust of the communities they intend to serve and demonstrate that they are reliable and capable of appropriately managing the data they hold. So Core Trust Seal was developed out of the Data Seal of Approval and the World Data System under an umbrella of Research Data Alliance Working Group in order to develop a set of core certification standards and align goals across different fields and disciplines. The outputs of the working group, which are RDA recommendations, became the core trustworthy data repositories requirements and the catalog of common procedures, which are at the heart of the Core Trust Seal certification standard. The Core Trust Seal has grown from 2 complementary approaches to a single set of guidelines, ensuring that data repositories can be trusted as stewards for the long term. It was designed to grow and adapt to changing circumstances and continues to build on its procedures and requirements to meet the needs of the repository community. I think the real meat of the purpose of the Core Trust is kind of right here. If we want to be able to share data, we need to store them in a trustworthy data repository. Data created and used by scientists should be managed, curated, and archived in such a way to preserve the initial investment in collecting them. Researchers must be certain that data held in archives remains useful and meaningful far into the future. Funding authorities increasingly require the continued access to data that is produced by the project that they fund, and have made this an important element in data management plans and in data sharing requirements. The sustainability of repositories also raises a number of challenging issues in different areas, including organizational, technical, financial, legal, and more. Certification can be an important contribution to ensuring the reliability and durability of data repositories, and therefore the potential for sharing data over a long period of time. By becoming certified, repositories can demonstrate to both their users and their funders that an independent authority has evaluated them and endorsed their trustworthiness. So here's a snapshot of the requirements that repositories must meet in order to earn certification. Laura is going to speak in just a few minutes about how the Dataverse software contributes to meeting these requirements for different installations. The orange box, the requirements in the orange box relate to organizational infrastructure, those in the blue box to digital object management, and red to technology. So the application process is fairly iterative. The process begins with a self-assessment to determine the level of compliance with the requirements. Once an evaluation is submitted, a panel of reviewers will evaluate their repository and then suggest improvements. Repositories can then go back and review their self-assessment, resubmit their application, and continue to apply as they make the recommended updates. So we have a few tips for preparing an application of things that we've kind of collectively learned. It's important to note that Core Trust Seal is really not principally about technology. Its focus is on documentation, and especially documentation of workflows and structures. Your application should mostly paraphrase policies that already exist and then link directly to them. If you need to explain something in your application that isn't already included in a policy, then that's a good indication that it should probably be in a policy somewhere. It's a great idea to include as many links as you can possibly find to be as clear as possible to direct the reviewers to where on your website or on the repository that this information can be found. The main work in applying for Core Trust Seal is not in the application itself. It's really ensuring that everything required by Core Trust is publicly documented. So I think that is, nope, this is the website for Core Trust Seal. I lifted most of what I said today directly from their website. So if you have, if you're looking at getting started, we'll have a lot more resources throughout this breakout session, but Core Trust Seal is definitely a really good place to start. So that's it for the overview.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And Laura, please start sharing your screen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Katie, I don't have permission to share my screen. Can you please share your?
Yes, I can go back and share it.
Okay, thank you.
So, all right, just let me know when to advance.
Okay, thank you. You can go ahead. Good morning, everyone. I'm here to talk about the Dataverse guide for Core Trust Seal. Especially it was released in March of this year. And the main scope is about technical information, Dataverse software technical information. And it was built to help collection support staff of Dataverse repositories to obtain Core Trust Seal certification. It also brings relevant, it's relevant for those considering using Dataverse software once they could plan their implementations following Core Trust Seal orientations using best practices. And it presents important concepts related to a trustworthy repository. For example, definitions on digital curation, OAIS model, repository. Please go ahead, Katie. The guide is a supplement, it's a kind of supplement of the Core Trust Seal extended guidance. And it presents how Dataverse software core functionality and design principle, starting with version 4, meet Core Trust Seal requirements. It also had answers from 3 successful application Dataverse repositories, Tilburg University Dataverse, Qualitative Data Repository, and Dataverse NO repository. Please go ahead, Katie. The guide is organized according to the requirements sections of the Core Trust Seal application. For example, they have, it has R0, R1, R2, and so on. Each guide section presents the Core Trust Seal requirements section definition. Also, it presents the Dataverse software technical functionalities that meet the requirement section, and the answer from the 3 Dataverse repositories that were successful in Core Trust Seal application. Please go ahead. In addition to technical requirements, it's important to highlight that Core Trust Seal requirements requires that collection support staff describe their processes, policies, expertise, make their documents publicly available, documents about mission, policies, depositors guideline, workflows, among others. The updates of the guide will be once according to the fiscal year. It will be made to account for relevant changes to the Dataverse software and the Core Trust Seal application, and to incorporate feedback received from users of the guide. I think it's the last one, Katie, please go ahead. I would like to share my screen and to show the guide. I don't know if it's possible, Katie, if you could.
I think Dwayne is the one in charge.
Dwayne, are you able to make Laura a co-host? Oh, great. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
I didn't want to do it mid-talk.
Sure, thank you.
No
Okay, thank you. Well, this is the first screen of the guide, and the contents here in the left side, and they are according to the requirements of the Core Trust Seal, and we have a printer-friendly version for all sections and for the whole guide. For example, here in the introduction, in the first screen, you can click here on the printer-friendly version and you can print all the guide. Or you can choose one section, and at the final, you can print each session separately. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Laura. We've got time for a couple of questions. If anyone has any questions about this, about the Dataverse guide for Laura. You can either drop into the chat box or you can unmute yourself if you'd like.
We have a comment in the chat from Wim, but I think it would be maybe more productive in kind of the longer discussion later. But up to you, Wim. If you'd like to ask it now to Laura directly, then totally your call. All right, he says discuss later. I think so too. Okay, well, we'll also have time for some Q&A later too. If you...
Could I ask just one question? This is Alexandra Butner speaking from Heidelberg University Library. Just a quick feedback. We looked at the guide and we found it extremely helpful. So thank you very much for all the work that's gone into that. I had one question according to the questions, have they changed over the last few years? Or I think it seems that the questions for the application are pretty much still the same. Is that correct?
Can I answer?
Yes, please do, Laura
okay.
or Katie,
Okay.
or yeah.
Okay, Alexandra, you mean the questions of the Core Trust Seal application that are in the form? Is that
yes,
it?
Yes.
We started to work on it since last year, and we started to fill the forms and according to the requirements. But sorry, I don't know if the questions have changed, but I think they are changing according to the years passing. I don't know exactly if it's changed. Katie, could you please say something about that?
Yeah, I think they've done, they review the requirements regularly. I think Core Trust started in, I want to say 2017 or 2018. And since then there's been one review, I believe, to update the requirements. I believe in this recent review, they didn't change any of the requirements. They changed a little bit of the wording of some of the guidance to make it clearer.
Okay.
And I think the review schedule is every 3 years, I want to say, sort of the same as the certification timeline for individual repositories. So I think they're on the same kind of review schedule. So the current ones are applicable until 2022 through 2022, and then there will be another review after that. But I wouldn't expect them to change like dramatically.
Drastically. Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Laura. And next, we're going to move into our panelist session, which James will introduce.
Thanks very much, and good morning, folks. I'm one of the West Coast folks, so it's quite early, so I'm just going to put a little more coffee in my cup here, and this will get me through this morning. Welcome, everyone. I hope everybody's having a great day and enjoying the session thus far. So we're going to jump into our panelist session now. We have 3 panelists. They're going to speak to their experiences with Core Trust Seal certification activities. We have Philip Konzett from the UiT Arctic University of Norway, Sonia Barbosa from Harvard University, and Karine Berger from Portage, which is a national RDM initiative operating out of Canada. The session will run essentially so that each of the panelists will have about 5 minutes just to present some slides or speak to their particular topics. And then we're going to open things up for just open discussion and questions. We'll have some questions for the panelists, and certainly if participants see some things that they want to ask about or follow up on, that will be your opportunity to do so. So without further ado, I'm not sure if I've got the right order there. I think it's Philip up first, so feel free to take it away.
Yeah, thank you. Just let me share my screen. Can you see my screen?
We can,
yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Thank you. So I had to slice down my slides a little bit, so just let me jump right to this slide with some key facts about Dataverse NO. It's a national generic repository for open research data from researchers from Norwegian organizations. It's a curated repository, and it's aligned with the FAIR principles. And since last year, we have been Core Trust Seal certified. Some of the benefits and the impact of the certification. We started our certification process soon after we established the repository, and this was a good chance for us to do some things right from the beginning, or at least in the early phase after we started. And in particular, the certification work forced us to allocate enough time and resources to address some more fundamental issues about our repository, and not only about having time for the daily business issues. And it also forced us to take a more generated, integrated approach to decision making and documentation. So we started working on a policy framework when we started our certification, rather than creating a lot of ad hoc documentation whenever we met a new challenge. How has the core trust seal improved the value of Dataverse NO for our users? First, I would say that for our existing partner organizations, the achieved certification makes it possible to promote the repository as a trustworthy and sustainable service. And second, for our designated community, that is the researchers or depositors that use the repository, the fact that we are now certified may give them some more confidence that by publishing the data in our repository, they would fulfill or meet the requirements of funders and publishers. And also, as a third thing, I would say that the certification makes Dataverse NO a more attractive repository for potential new partner organizations. And some lessons we have learned from our certification process. So we already, before we started this application, we had been focusing on best practice recommendations and international standards, of course. But when we during the process, the application process, certification process, we discovered some gaps in our approaches, and in particular the need for explicit and transparent documentation. And we also realized that it's one thing to have a solid technical infrastructure in place, but it's also important to have a kind of or the trustworthiness and sustainability of a repository has also much to do with the organizational infrastructure, including a long-term commitment from our owner, and also about human resources and skills. Something about how the long-term evolution of the repository affects the certification. We are, of course, expecting that our repository will grow and also increase have an increased variety in terms of the number of depositors and also the number of partner organizations, and also in terms of the served disciplines and deposited data types. And this, of course, may pose some scalability challenges, which we will need to address. But I think the most important thing here is that we have a long-term commitment by the owner and the partner organizations. So I think this will make us well placed to meet these scalability challenges. Yeah, I think that was my 5 minutes. Thanks.
I think you came in even under 5, which is unprecedented. So congratulations, you're setting the bar. Thanks very much, Philip. So I think we'll just pass it right on over. I believe it's Sonia that's up next. Take it away, Sonia.
Thank you for leaving me the extra time because I always need it. So let me just make sure I am sharing properly with my notes. Can everybody see that, but not my notes?
Yep, we can see it. Thank you, Sonia.
Awesome. Wonderful. Thank you. So I'm Sonia Barboza, and I manage curation for the Harvard Dataverse repository here at Harvard University. And I'm going to be talking briefly about the Harvard Dataverse repository model for Core Trust Seal certification. Any day now. So the Harvard Dataverse is a generalist data repository, which is open to the worldwide research community and built using the Dataverse software. The repository was established in 2006, primarily to support the sharing and preservation of social science data, but it quickly became a home to numerous other disciplines, including chemistry, the life sciences, physics, engineering, medicine, and math. Our repository is supported by a self-curated and self-managed curation workflow, meaning that the authors and data managers and curators are responsible for creating and managing their own content with our support. It's just a little slow. So for several years, we've been discussing how our repository can qualify for Core Trust Seal certification, being a generalist repository, being self-curated. Keeping in mind that the Dataverse software provides numerous functions by default that satisfy some of the Core Trust Seal requirements, as you saw with Laura's presentation of the guide that we put together, we started to discuss how we could use well-curated collections that were supported by a curation or a data management team outside of the Harvard Dataverse, sometimes in collaboration with our team here, as a possible model for certification. We knew that our entire repository collection would not meet the requirements because of the self-curated workflow model we used, but we also knew that some of our collections would be prime examples of what Core Trust Seal was looking for. So our plan for the application is outlined here. After reviewing the Core Trust Seal application, we took note of sections of the application that the data in the repository we need to satisfy in order to meet the approval. Determining that we would reach out to 30 collections for our initial certification process, knowing that not everyone would be on board or ready for the work entailed to apply and to make changes to their Dataverse collection and policies and workflows to meet the requirements. Our team reviewed these collections. We had old collections and newer collections, and we assessed the quality and activity of each collection to determine if they would be a good fit for our model. We reviewed their data management websites, their use of the Dataverse features to move their data towards FAIR, to get an overall picture of the collection's strengths and weaknesses related to Core Trust Seal requirements. And if they were interested in participating, we would help them to correct their collection shortcomings as needed. So we provided each collection with 3 documents summarizing their overall data sharing use using the repository. So we assessed how they currently meet the policy guideline requirements of Core Trust Seal by having front-facing policies on their organization or institutional websites, how they're making use or not making use of the features that Dataverse provides to move their data towards FAIR and support Core Trust Seal. And we also created a memo of understanding on how the collection needs to be maintained going forward if they're certified, meaning that all of the policies and all of the features that we work on agreeing that they need to implement would be implemented and would stay in place throughout the 3 years of renewing the certification. Because we wanted to be sure that each managed collection was supported for their data sharing needs, we also broke the collections down into different managed collections. So we have a historical collection for collections that are no longer funded, basically sundowned, but they meet FAIR standards and they deserve recognition for their curation and governance. And is supported by Harvard Data, the Dataverse data management team. We had licensed collections that are collections purchased for access by such places as Harvard for their affiliates. These collections often perform some level of curation of the data before sharing, and so we also wanted to make sure that their efforts were captured. And of course, journal collections. We needed to highlight the important details of how journals should share their data. For example, that they would be likely doing reproducibility verification, bidirectional linking, and controlled workflows. So this is what our model looks like, what I just talked about, which is the curated collections being reviewed, looking at their policies, looking at how they're meeting FAIR, existing curation practices, and filling in where they were missing pertinent information. We broke down the managed collections into these models that I spoke about. We presented summaries to each of these collections about how they were meeting Core Trust FAIR requirements, what they were missing, including their features, and then we started to develop MOUs and policies and incorporate best practices into their collections. So of course, after selecting 30 collections, we ended up with about 15 collections that actually replied and wanted to be considered for certification. This is just showing some of our reviews that we did in terms of the Core Trust Seal, using a scoring platform based on their current existing policies and use of features to move their data towards FAIR, and talking about what the Harvard Dataverse repository would be responsible for and what the managed collection would be responsible for each of those Core Trust Seal guidelines. This is how they were meeting more of the Core Trust Seal requirements for licensing, continuity of access. So we would literally have the name of the collection here and whether they needed it or whether it was incomplete or if they were meeting the requirements. And this is a rubric for the features in Dataverse. And if those collections that we are looking at were actually meeting those requirements, or if they were not, and how many of the features they were using. So from this process, we created a Core Trust. We decided that we would have a Core Trust Seal curation service model. The Harvard Dataverse repository already offers paid curation services, but we decided that we would add a curation service model for Core Trust Seal preparation to help collections that were interested in applying for that with the Harvard Dataverse to be able to meet those requirements. And of course, we've already talked about the guide. Laura talked about the guide that we developed for the Dataverse software to help installers fill in the application. And so this project has led to development of best practices for data curation using the Dataverse software. We have a lot of guides, but we needed to make the guides a little simpler, a little easier to use. So we're putting together our best practices for using all of the features in the Dataverse. This is a draft document that will be available to everyone who uses the Harvard Dataverse repository. We're really geared towards these collections that are trying to get certified. So, I mean, just so we know, we hope to get the certification done this year, at least the application. We find collections are more than willing to help us improve their use of Dataverse if we help them along. We find that a lot of them need more guidance in presenting their front-facing policies and making sure they're touching on every aspect of FAIR in their instructions on their policies to their authors. And we're working to develop with the development team at Harvard to tag certified collections and generalist repositories. Since we have to find some way to make these collections stand out, we can use features such as the featured Dataverse collections that we offer with the software, but also these searchable facets for certified collections. And of course, we hope to work with the Core Trust Seal board to develop these models. That is the end of my presentation. And I just wanted to mention that we did do a presentation on Core Trust Seal with Open Repositories Conference that took place last week, I believe, and presented this along with some members of the Core Trust Seal group.
Excellent.
Thank
Thanks
you.
very much, Sonia. So I think we'll jump right into our next panelist, Karine. Feel free to take it away if you'd like to share your screen and present.
Okay. Ooh, my share screen function is having just a little bit of trouble finding all of my windows. Let me just try that again. Alternatively, if somebody wants to do the slide transitions for me, that is fine too.
Yeah, I'm happy to run the share screen if that would be helpful.
That would be, I think, probably easier. It's just having trouble finding my windows for some reason.
Yeah, sure. Hang on. Okay, is this the right first slide?
Perfect.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you so much to the other presenters. That was previous one was really interesting and will be really interesting, I think, for some of the participants in our initiative, which is a Core Trust Seal certification support cohort. So I'm talking from just a little bit of a different perspective, similar to the Core Trust Seal curation service that was just mentioned, I think. But in this case, this initiative grew out of a funding initiative that has sort of morphed into something a little bit bigger. So to back up for a second, Portage, as James mentioned at the very beginning, is a national research data management initiative that has as its mandate to support research data management in Canada by growing communities of practice and providing services and building infrastructure that support research data management, including the federated research data repository that is managed out of Portage. Portage began in 2015 under the Canadian Association of Research Libraries. As of April of this year, it is now under a new digital research infrastructure organization that joins research data management with research software and advanced research computing, and is temporarily named the new digital research infrastructure organization. That will change. But so that's where we are. Why a repository certification cohort? You can go to the next slide. So for all the good reasons that were mentioned in the beginning of this session for achieving Core Trust Seal certification, this was something that falls squarely in Portage's mandate to support. So initially, as I mentioned, this started as a funding project. So we thought that we would help support repositories that were seeking to achieve Core Trust Seal certification by providing funding. It quickly morphed into, let's also coordinate a certification support cohort based on models that we have seen from DANCE, from the Australian Research Data Commons, from ESIP in the US, which is coordinating worldwide support cohort. So we looked at some of those models and we thought, hey, we can, maybe do that for Canadian repositories that are seeking to achieve Core Trust Seal. So of course, the broader goals are to advance fair and trust principles in Canada, to support Canadian repositories in demonstrating trustworthiness to their stakeholders by achieving certification. And as a broader goal, of course, this all feeds back into strengthening the Canadian research community. We can go to the next slide. So how do we do this? Again, Portage, so we have a small secretariat, but the strength of Portage lies in its network. So we bring together expert groups and working groups from 60 plus organizations. You can see the expert groups, some of them on the left there, including at the bottom, the Data Repositories expert group. And on the right, we have some of the working groups. Next slide, please. So to provide oversight for our Core Trust Seal certification support cohort, the sort of natural fit home for this was the Data Repositories expert group. So the expert group brings together representatives from key repository stakeholder communities, provides coordination for some of the working groups, and overall aims to ensure a cohesive approach to repository development in Canada. So this group meets once a month and provides oversight basically for this initiative. So as we were developing the concept and developing our project documents, everything was kind of fed back through the Data Repositories expert group for their feedback and expert guidance. Next slide, please. So in terms of a timeline of where we are, the project, as you can see, was initiated in October of last year. We issued a call for applications in February, which is on our website still. And so we issued it as a competitive funding call and also the opportunity to participate in a cohort, which meant that we had an interesting situation because we knew that we would have repositories interested that would not be eligible to receive funding because all of our funding that we administer is federal funding and there are eligibility kind of limitations for that. So we can't, for example, provide funding back to federal agencies that may have data repositories. But we decided to sort of accept applications from folks who weren't eligible for funding who might be interested in participating without funding. So we went through a selection process. The Data Repositories expert group essentially served as our adjudication panel for that. And by May 2021, we had selected our repositories and announced them. And that's where we are now. We're now in the process of planning cohort workshops and activities. We're going to be sending out a survey shortly to our participants to solicit feedback on what they're most interested in terms of topics and formats and activities and such. And our funding will be distributed through March 2022, so to coincide with the end of the fiscal year. So we're calling this a pilot project. Pretty excited about it. We'll see what happens. You can go to the next slide, please. And just a quick, if you can read this, this is just the list of repositories that are participating with funding on the left and without funding on the right. And a quick note that this wasn't planned, but we actually have 6 of the 12 repositories that are participating with funding are Dataverse repositories. So we are very much interested in the question of Dataverse Core Trust Seal certification. And then you'll notice on the right-hand column, there's also a cohort of Dataverse repositories that's led out of Scholars Portal by someone who is on this call, if she wants to make herself known. And so we are going to be coordinating closely with that group. There may be some overlap in cohort activities. So just, yeah, because we have, partly Dataverse repositories and also non-Dataverse repositories, there'll be some overlap and some difference between those two groups. And I think that's all I need to say for the moment. Happy to take any questions before we move on.
Fantastic. Thanks, Corinne, and thanks to all our panelists. At this time, we're going to actually just open it up for some questions discussion. I think we're maybe cut into time a little bit, but my co-chairs can chime in. I think we can probably still work in about 10 minutes or so.
Absolutely, yeah.
Perfect. So just given the time, we did have some questions that we provided to the panelists to kind of chew on a bit before, but I think maybe why don't we just open it up just to see if we do have attendees that have questions off the bat. I think you're welcome to either unmute and ask your question or to put it into the chat. And if not, again, we can turn to some of the questions that we had thought up and had the panelists think on a little bit before today's session. Anyone out there with questions for any or all of our panelists? Okay, well, why don't we start things off with a question then for you. So first off, thanks again for your presentations. And yeah, there's that commonality around Core Trust Seal, but some diversity there as well in terms of where folks are at or from an installation versus the new initiative that Corinne just spoke to. So maybe just to start things off, for anyone or all of the panelists, what were the primary deciding factors that really prompted you to either achieve or consider achieving the certification for Core Trust Seal or putting it out? Because it's a lot of, it's a lot of effort, but it's like many things that are worthwhile. It takes effort and there's some payoff, and then maybe there's a layer to that. If you do want to, ad lib or put it in there around any challenges and or successes that you have run into, whether anticipated or unanticipated. So stop there, open it up for anyone. Looks like Sonia, surprisingly, Sonia has something to say here.
So excited. It's like I've been up since I don't know what time getting things wrangled for the meeting. So, and I went to get my coffee, James, thank you. So I'll tell you, one of the reasons we've been talking about Core Trust Seal at Harvard Dataverse Repository for a while. We were just really stumped by how we could do it. Given the requirements, not that we couldn't find a model, but given the requirements, how could we do it? And because we don't want to discourage people from taking, from depositing data. One of the main goals of Dataverse is to make depositing data easy and get people to get their citations right away. That's really what they want. They want their citations, they want us to preserve the data, and they want to move on, right? So we've implemented, some required metadata every once in a while. Every year or so, we consider making one extra metadata field required so that people can't get away without putting enough information into their deposit. However, we're only at 5 required fields when you come in to enter information into Dataverse. Okay, it's mostly the fields that make up the citation. And so we thought, well, if we work with these collections that are actually doing a lot of work, right? The policies are there. They have templates for policies that anyone can use and, put, together for their own group. If we actually worked with these collections and showcased them and added this badge, maybe other people that are coming on board will see the value of having that badge and having that work and seeing the improvements that take place on their collection and the use cases around their collection. We always we stress how important it is to have a well curated collection for use, because people are going to go and use data that are easy to understand, have all the information in them, okay, that they don't have to try to contact the author for if they can't get the information they need. It was really hard to reach some of the authors, which is why we have these historical collections that I talked about, right? Those people might no longer be there, and that collection is sitting there in our repository, needing somebody to maybe answer questions, right? So we wanted these other collections that were coming in to see this highlighted collection, well done, with policies, and we're hoping that they'll follow suit. They'll come back and say, you know, I want my collection to look like that one. I see all the links on the Dataverse to their policies and their research data management plans and their instructions to their authors. And I see that they have all these searchable facets and they're using the right format for data. They're using the Data Explorer tool. My file is not using the Data Explorer tool. Why not? Well, let's talk about how they're doing this, how these certified collections are doing this. So we're really hoping it'll be a model that other depositors, especially larger groups and organizations, see. And they have a model they can work with if they don't know where to start, because believe it or not, there are some groups that want to do this and they don't know where to start and they don't have the right support team behind them, but we can help them do that.
Excellent. Philip or Karine, anything to add in there from your own perspectives?
I guess I could just say in terms of choosing a certification to pursue or to support a cohort in achieving, Core Trust Seal was kind of a no-brainer in the sense that it's a more basic certification that can be used as a stepping stone if people want to go beyond that and achieve other kinds of certification afterwards. It's also community-led, of course, which just makes sense. And for us, in terms of supporting certification, another consideration, as has been mentioned, it ties into stakeholders and funder requirements and all that kind of thing. But the federal funding agencies in Canada have recently released a new research data management policy, which explicitly requires researchers to deposit data, metadata, and software in a data repository. Nothing in there at the moment about certification, but Core Trust Seal certification is kind of a more and more widely recognized way to sort of demonstrate trustworthiness. So it just made sense. It just made sense for us.
Yeah,
if I may, sorry.
No, go ahead, Philip.
If I may follow up on this, I think also for us, the last point you made about the requirements from funders and publishers, it could be current requirements, but also possible future requirements. I think we wanted to make sure that our repository would kind of comply with these current and future requirements. And also, I mean, the basic reason why we wanted to get our repository certified is, as I said in my presentation, we wanted to do with things right from the start, and also so that our partner institutions and the researchers could trust in our repository.
Now, I was just going to say, putting on my repository manager hat now, the University of Alberta's Dataverse was one of the successful repositories for the Core Trust Seal certification initiative. And so we just saw a lot of value in it. And it's really about the community piece, which is such a huge part of Portage to start with. Nobody's out there to point fingers at an installation, say you're not doing this not right or this not good enough or anything like that. It's not about that. It's about us being able to kind of look inwards and also connect with our colleagues and our other installations to learn and really grow, because it's newer for many. And as an installation at University of Alberta that's going through real growth right now, both in terms of certification, but we're actually migrating over to the Scholars Portal National Service as well. And then Karine mentioned our national federal funders, the tri-agencies, putting out their data deposit requirements, which are kind of clear as mud right now to many, I think, and there's no firm requirements as in italics with asterisks on either side, and we're not quite sure when, but we know it's coming and there's lots to think about. So this is exactly the type of initiative that really helps us as service providers, I think, as well.
Right. And I actually had a comment, because I know that Brian Westra asked about creating a map to visualize core trust requirements, FAIR, curation requirements. We're actually working on a diagram, at least for the Harvard Dataverse repository, that we hope others can use. I can't point to it right now just because I have everything else open for the community meeting today, but that will be part of the documentation that we provide, is this visualization of how the Dataverse Network, IQSS, other organizations at Harvard, Core Trust Seal, and the repository all come together to support Core Trust Seal. So we're hoping that these models, again, can be something that the Dataverse community can borrow and use as they need, which is the same purpose for the guide. It's for the Dataverse community. And of course, anyone else who wants to take it on or install the Dataverse. But that's what we're doing. We're trying to create something that's going to be usable by the community and not just for our own repository.
If I make a comment on a question or a comment from the chat by Roxanne, I think it's about institutional repositories. I'm not sure if I understand the question, but is it about if there is any point in certifying an institutional repository? I'm not sure. I think it doesn't matter if you're an institutional repository or a generic repository or a national repository or a domain-specific repository. I think it would benefit your users, your designated community.
Correct. I mean, Harvard Dataverse is an institutional repository, but it's also open to the worldwide community. But we have a lot of efforts towards Harvard alone. And we know that, and we have pieces of that model that we can clearly show that we service Harvard, but we are also open to helping anybody else that's coming to use us. So
I know I'm not a panelist, but just to jump in quickly, because I have a thought. So I think institutional repositories are great candidates for Core Trust Seal, especially because, institutions like universities and libraries especially have a mandate to preserve research objects, and that's not going to change anytime soon. There are domain repositories that are popping up that are really good at handling big data or complex data for all sorts of different research objects, but they might be funded privately or funded by a corporation, and those can be a little bit more unstable over like the distant long term, the way that libraries and universities maybe are kind of a little bit more stable in that sense.
Yeah, that's exactly how we see our mission to provide a sustainable repository for our researchers at our university and the other partner universities or institutions. So and maybe in particular the researchers from kind of the long tail of research, because as you said, Katie, some of the fields, they have their kind of well-established domain-specific repositories, but there is a long tail of researchers that do not have this kind of infrastructure, at least at the moment.
Some great discussions, and I'm thinking probably now, for the interest of time, we might turn to our breakout room discussions. I'm not sure who's controlling the slides. We could maybe put that slide up around the breakout room discussions, and I can. Perfect, fantastic. So we're going to break out into rooms, and this is just a quick little housekeeping slide for folks. Once you get transported into your room, and you find yourself among a few colleagues, there's a few tasks just to start with. First one, and I think we're all probably pros at breakout rooms at this point virtually, but first thing to do is assign a note taker, and I think it's okay if you have multiple as well, or people you want to be able to be part of the discussion as well. But also as importantly is to have a reporter, so somebody who's going to just report back a bit. We're going to do quick summaries of all the breakout rooms and the discussions had, which is always the interesting part. For sure. And so you just want to summarize responses in the notes document, and just keep in mind, again, just because of time, you want to keep your reports fairly succinct. So try to do it in about a minute or so. We'll give 2 minutes if it's Sonia, because she usually has lots she can talk about and inform us on. All right, so just maybe the next slide there. We've got some breakout room questions. Certainly don't feel confined to only answer these or think about these. I'm sure you folks have lots of great questions, so feel free to ad lib in that respect. But there's a few questions here, and I'm not sure if they have access to these in their notes document in their breakout rooms, or if not, if maybe we can copy and paste these into the respective breakout room chat so they have them. But these are the ones to essentially think about here if you don't have others. And I think rather than taking up any more time, I can stop there, pass it over, unless one of my co-chairs has anything to add in if I've missed anything.
Nope, I think you've got everything, James. Thank you very much. And now we just have to figure out how to do the breakout rooms. So stay tuned as you get sorted into a room. Thank you very much.
Folks, so are we just, I guess, are we just jumping into the reports now for the summaries?
Yeah, that sounds great. That sounds great, Jeff. I can, yeah.
Sounds good. So I guess if folks, hopefully if you've identified somebody to report back, and again, just keeping mindful of the time, around a minute or so, just a nice high level, succinct summary, and we can start in order, starting with breakout room number 1.
Oh, sorry. I think that was our room. It took me a while to figure out we were in breakout room number 1 because that was the only room that didn't have any notes yet. So we tackled question number 3. Do you think researchers value Core Trust Seal? And for the newer members of the community who are starting their installations but don't actually have the data in there yet, they're just creating their model. A lot of the questions came up, again, it reminds me of the early days of the Harvard Dataverse repository and the Dataverse software. How do we get people to buy into sharing data in a repository? How do we get people to understand the value of data repositories? We brought up the fact that one of the attendees brought up the fact that some researchers just need a repository, so they choose one and they put data in, but they're not really looking at what that repository is offering. Are they meeting standards? What are they doing? So we've talked about educating the researcher on the value of a repository, taking time to educate them, because that's something we did for a very long time with the Harvard Dataverse. When we started the actual Harvard Dataverse repository, we spent a lot of time in conferences, writing papers, reaching out to researchers, and we spent a lot of time doing the curation for people. We did the curation for a good, as I mentioned, because I was sitting there doing the curation, for a good 10 years, we held hands, and we held a lot of hands, put their data in for them. We created their Dataverse spaces, reached out to them, and invited them to review their Dataverse spaces in a draft format, because they didn't know what it looked like before, right? They didn't have a space, but we created it for them, put in a sample data set from their website or their journal and said, hey, come take a look at this. Do you like this? We can help you continue this model, right? But it was years of educating researchers on the value, but look at where we are now. Everybody that you talk to that's in the research field knows about Dataverse. Whether they've used it or not, if they're in research, they know about Dataverse. So I wanted to put forth really talk about how much effort we put into that and to bring in value to the community in the Harvard Dataverse. People reach out to us who cannot support their own data and say, well, I'm going to use Harvard Dataverse, even though they could put in their own installation. I'm going to put in Harvard Dataverse because of your support team. Because you have the support team that I heard is just awesome. You guys follow up and you really sit down with people and help them do the work. There's value to that. Again, your researchers are not data curators. They want a place to share their data and they need that support. But over time, you will have other people doing some of that support for you for their own groups. If they've used Dataverse once, they normally go back to other segments of their groups, of their institutions, and talk to them about how to use it. So you're building a community of, say, support curation supporters or advocates. And you already have that in the 69 collections or installations of the Harvard Dataverse around the world that you can make use of to educate your community about the value. Oh, and John Crabtree talked about trust, letting people know that funders appreciate repositories meeting these requirements. So when you talk to your researchers, let them understand, make sure they know that funding agencies appreciate putting data in repositories that meet FAIR and trust. So that's another initiative, a way to bring your researchers in. But really, there's a lot of education to use and go on when you're just starting. Did I miss anything, Laura? Because I did start taking notes late. So I tried to kind of combine everything into three short summaries.
No, I think it's okay.
Okay, and then I think Jose said that, so Amber said demystifying curation, right? One of the reasons for selecting Dataverse is definitely an awesome support provided. That's right, because and you're not getting, remember, you're not getting support just from the community. The Harvard Dataverse team, if you don't know yet, we support every other installation when they need support for their services. That might not be clear, but we don't just work with the people who are using Harvard Dataverse. We do the trainings for other installations. So we provide that support anyway. So make sure you take advantage of that. You know, Odom's team is, they do the reproducibility verification. So we always recommend that you go to their team and get that support. But just understanding that some of these earlier installations are doing quite a bit to support the community, and you just need to reach out to them and they're more than willing to assist.
Great, thanks, Sonia. Just guess jump right over into room number 2. If you have a reporter that can just give us a brief summary of the discussions in that breakout room.
I can, I'll dive in, and everybody else in room 2, if I miss something, please let me know. So we went off the script. We just went free form, and we just started having a discussion about, in general, what and why core trust. Why should folks do it? What are the benefits to it? And obviously we came up with some of the key benefits in terms of value to our user community, but then there's also that value for going through the process to identify the gaps in your own institutional policies, procedures, practices, and documentation. Another thing that popped out that I think was pretty interesting and exciting, and I'm sure Philip is going to get a lot of requests for this, is that he and his team developed a template, a curation, kind of data curation evaluation template, so that when researchers provide a data set, if they have not completed to the satisfaction of their team information about it, they can get a report on what is missing or what kinds of additional information or documentation would be needed in order to kind of meet the curation standards, their curation standards. And I think that a key takeaway from this is that report kind of helps give a little bit more compliance and give a little more reason for the researchers to perform the mitigations of the data sets, an improvement of the data sets, because they don't feel like they're being singled out necessarily, or that a particular curation reviewer is being picky for their data set specifically, but more that template gives you an idea that actually your data needs to meet a particular standard. So I think that was a really great takeaway from this, and we'll probably be following up with Philip about that.
Excellent, thanks. And so I'll jump in for room number 3. And sorry, I think like others, we didn't have edit access right off the bat, so we might have missed a couple of things off the start. So again, folks in that room, feel free to fill in the blanks. I won't reiterate. I think we had some of the same discussions as others in terms of the value of Core Trust Seal, and things that are of value aren't always easy to do, but it doesn't mean that you don't do them. And I think like many large complex initiatives, they can be a bit complex and eye-crossing at the start, but when you kind of break it down to its parts and just kind of chip away at it, it can make it seem a bit easier, and you can have those small kind of successes as you go along. So we talked a bit about the motivation for folks depositing data. There's the carrots and there's the sticks out there, and I'm seeing more and more folks doing the carrots and seeing that, hey, they're coming proactively to deposit data, not because they're required. It's part of the open science flavor, but there still is a lot coming, and probably more than coming around requirements. Journal requirements obviously been one of the big pushes. We talked a bit about that. Funding agent policies. We had a few Canadians in our room, and as Corinne mentioned, we recently had a national RDM policy that has a third pillar around data deposits. So there's the momentum's building there, and that's that top level support that's really important. but there's still a lot of work out there around education and convincing folks to deposit data and where to deposit data. And it brought up the notion of trusted and what does trusted mean? And of course, it can mean different things, but with Core Trust Seal, it does bring some things to the table that can be, then brought forth to the researchers, the end users that were there to support and ultimately their research. And so if it comes along with that, things are being curated, that the data itself, the files are being vetted to, different extents to give it that trustworthiness, that stamp of approval, then those are really good, great value added pieces. It kind of went over into things around licensing as well. So, and there was a good discussion around whether repositories can ensure depositors actually have their rights and authority, like the appropriate licenses to deposit data. And that's one I think that anyone who's been running a Dataverse installation, you run into different, different scenarios and different flavors. And I run into things personally around restricted access data. And I know that there's a longer tail conversation that needs to be had about that and what we do with them. So it's really interesting there to think about that and talk about that and what kind of implications there may be for the repository, accepting or not, and the conversations that might need to be had. There's probably some more mature installations out there or ones that have been dealing with this that can add, some thoughts around those types of things, and recognizing that different types of end users will have different understanding of these things, like researchers versus they were talking about government agencies and the different layers and checks and balances that might already be existing in place. But again, it adds some work, and so it's also about educating for the researchers that it's time well spent, that there is value and benefits for it. But if we don't educate around those things, often anything will seem like it's just more time spent not doing my research. And so it's about those types of things. And then just to finish it off, there was a quick comment before we got sucked back into the main room, just around potential for automation of some processes as we move forward, because there is a lot of work involved and some things have to be manual, I think, to some degrees, but the automation pieces, maybe as we move forward, are some things that we might want to think about. And that is generally, I think, a perspective around the Dataverse as a software installation. We try to automate things and try to add these great features that we see every year adding, and that's coming from ground zero at Harvard and beyond. But then there's also these types of things that have some administrative flavors to them, and things that might be delivered differentially to some degree out of different installations. But how can we come together and kind of put our brains together in our community and think about those to help support as we move forward? Certainly. So I'll stop there. If I missed anything from any of my fellow breakout room folks, feel free to chime in. Otherwise, we can go to the next room.
Yep,
I'm
next room. Yes.
I'm reporting back for room number 4, and if anybody in room number 4 has things to add or mention that I forget, please jump in. We also sort of went a little bit off script. We didn't go through all the 4 questions. A lot of the time was spent talking about the certification process and where it fits into existing activities at each institution. A lot of people mentioned that they were using it as an exercise to fill in gaps in their own policies and support that they provide to the researchers. And we're using that also as a promotional tool to convince researchers of the utility of depositing their data and to reassure them that it was a trustworthy source, as well as seeking support at the institutional level for more resources. A lot of people are stretched a little bit thin in the roles that they play, and Core Trust Seal could be used as something to beef up the resources that they have at their disposal. There was some discussion also about where fulfilling Core Trust Seal requirements would fit into the existing priorities for an institution. Are other things a little bit more pressing? Is focusing on FAIR, for example, would that be more useful at the beginning stages of offering these types of services? Or should you do things as a bundle and try and do Core Trust Seal as well, in that it also satisfies a lot of the FAIR requirements? It's a more sort of higher level. And to what extent are researchers convinced of the utility of Core Trust Seal as opposed to other requirements that they might be concerned about? We had a number of Canadians in our group as well. And at the federal level, there are some concerns about, certainly among researchers, about satisfying these new federal requirements, and Core Trust Seal certification would go towards alleviating some of these concerns. We saw that as a useful thing to pursue, even if it was more labor intensive than some other aspects they were looking at. And also we looked at Core Trust Seal as a potential differentiator for depositing data locally in a local Dataverse or shared Dataverse, as opposed to depositing your research data in other repositories around the world. So these were some of the issues we looked at. There was no real consensus. I think the one thing that struck me was a general sense that Core Trust Seal in and of itself is a useful and productive exercise for setting up emerging research data repository at an institution, and that it would fulfill a lot of the necessary requirements for funding, for satisfying researchers' needs, and for providing a solid foundation for service going into the future.
Session. Room number 5.
I don't think we had a official reporter from group 5, but if anybody else wants to jump in, otherwise I'm happy to report.
Please do, Katie. I know we're
right.
a little bit over time, but
Yeah, I'll be very quick. We only we had a great conversation about different long-term preservation systems to incorporate into Dataverse. So, you know, what kind of server, what kind of you know, system are you using to, you know, package up your repository content, move it over to a long-term preservation platform. We talked a little bit about how whether researchers are asking for Core Trust Seal certification, if that is determining how they are choosing a repository. We had 2 good examples from Texas Data Repository. There was an engineering researcher that needed a trusted repository for some kind of federal agency collaboration. And they didn't need to be certified, but needed to be somewhat in the process of working towards certification. And then another one from Texas Data Repository about a reviewer actually asking a researcher whether their, you know, data curation and their repository was meeting a specific standard. It wasn't Core Trust Seal, but it was another, I think it was a geosciences standard. We talked a bit about how it's much more about policies and documentation rather than technology improvements, and how important data curation seems to be. And then there was a good note about how EOSC might start requiring some type of certification in order to become a node in that system somewhere in the future. So Core Trust will hopefully meet that need too. So that was group 5.
thanks so much, Katie. And thank you very much for everyone who's stuck around a little bit over time. Thank you to our panelists and to our presenter. And I think that's about it. That's a wrap. So thanks again for a successful session. We had a great session last year on Core Trust, and I think we've continued the conversation very well into this year, and hope to see you at our next sessions. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye, thank you.